Good afternoon, everyone, and welcome to the live stream event of the World Water Day commemoration. This is a collaborative effort with the partners of UNICEF, the Caribbean Water and Wastewater Association, the Caribbean WaterNet, UNDP, the Faculty of Food and Agriculture of the University of the West Indies, and Global Water Partnership Caribbean, aims to adopt an educational approach to highlight how everyday human practices affect underground water, which in turn threatens sustainable development of our region. World Water Day is an annual United Nations observance that celebrates water and raises awareness of the 2 billion people currently living without access to safe water. I'd like to first recognize our partners. The European Union is a political and economic partnership that represents a unique form of cooperation among sovereign countries. It aims to uphold and promote its values and interests, contribute to peace and security and the sustainable development of the earth, contribute to solidarity and mutual respect among people, free and fair trade, eradication of poverty and the protection of human rights, strict observance of international law, as well as PAHO, the Pan-American Health Organization. It is an international public health agency working to improve the lives of people globally and the health and living standards of people in the Americas. It is founded in 1902, and the Pan-American Health Organization is the world's oldest international public health agency. Its essential mission is to strengthen the national and local health systems and improve health outcomes for all people in the Americas. Thank you very much. First, we'll start with our opening remarks from Donna Gittins, the Program Manager of the Climate Change Delegation of the European Union.
Thank you very much, Franca. Welcome to everyone joining us today to celebrate World Water Day. Please let me take this opportunity to extend warm greetings to our viewing audience and panelists from all of us at the delegation of the European Union. It is an honor to celebrate with you and our colleagues from the Pan-American Health Organization and UNICEF, two organizations which continue to work tirelessly within the region to safeguard public health through action to ensure improved and equitable access to clean, safe water. We at the European Union, in our partnership and work on the ground with governments across the region, have witnessed firsthand the impacts of climate change and unsustainable practices on water resources in the Caribbean, and the tremendous challenges that can result from limited or unreliable access on households, farms, and in the business sector. Through the programs we support, we have listened to the lived experiences of people across the Caribbean as they speak of the economic and social implications of water shortages resulting from extreme drought periods, and in some areas, challenges with accessing water resources that are safe and fit for purpose. These challenges were further exacerbated by the onset of the COVID-19 pandemic. If the pandemic has taught us anything, it is that there's a need for better understanding of the link between our ability to access water and public health. It has reminded us that the access to clean water and sanitation remains the best protection to reduce the spread of infections and save lives. This year's theme, groundwater making the invisible visible, is of great relevance to the region as groundwater remains a key source of national supplies in many countries. As such, as with all water sources, its protection is paramount and remains a principal approach for the protection of human health. In this, the nations of the European Union are similarly minded, as groundwater is considered the most sensitive and largest body of fresh water in the European Union and is a main source of public drinking water supplies in many regions. Given its import, the European Union has passed a number of water-focused directives over the years, all aimed at the protection of resources in the face of increased demand, competing uses, the impacts of the changing climate, and the threat of pollution. These are all challenges that we in the region understand very well. While the European Green Deal, which was adopted in 2021, provides a framework for the ambitions for climate neutrality in Europe, water is featured in all of its key actions, from agriculture to zero pollution and decarbonization efforts and energy production. Under the EU Action Plan towards zero pollution for air, water, and soil, a key deliverable of the European Green Deal is an integrated vision for 2050. It's presented where pollution, inclusive of pollution of water resources, is reduced to levels that are no longer harmful to human health or natural ecosystems. The commonality between the work in the region to safeguard water resources and the ambitions under the Green Deal have provided the springboard for our ongoing support under a number of programs. This includes the Health and Climate Change Initiative being implemented by PAHO, the focus on development of climate information systems to monitor selected determinants of health, including water and sanitation, and the Enhancing Climate Resilience in CARIFORUM Countries program under implementation by 5Cs, which supports water investment, evidence-based planning, capacity building, and improvement in operations within the sector. As the European Union looks towards strengthening its partnerships and continuing support in the regional fight against climate change, we remain cognizant of the importance of water to development in the region and resolute in our commitment to support. Many thanks to PAHO for their efforts in driving these conversations forward and for providing a platform for regional stories and perspectives to be told. Before I close, please allow me to, on behalf of the delegation of the European Union, to pay tribute to Dr. Hugh Seeley, following the news that we received of his passing. Dr. Seeley represented the very best what the region has to offer. A brilliant mind, a visionary, a trusted voice in climate. His contributions are too numerous to count, and invaluable to development in the region. He will be missed. We look forward, as you do, to the insights from the panel, and thank you for inviting us to speak today.
Thank you very much, Ms. Gittins. Thank you for your introduction, and please accept my condolences. Next, for the opening remarks, we will have Adriana Thomas, the coordinator of the EU CARIFORUM Climate Change and Health Project. Ms. Thomas, I believe you're muted.
I'm sorry. Thank you, Priyanka. Good evening, colleagues, panelists, and those viewing our live conversation today. It is a pleasure for me as the new coordinator for the European Union CARIFORUM Climate Change and Health Project, strengthening climate resilient health systems in the Caribbean, to join you today for this timely discussion. Today, we are collaborating with several strategic regional partners to coordinate this activity in observance of World Water Day 2022 under the theme Groundwater, Making the Invisible Visible. Our objective is to draw attention to the linkages between water, climate, and our health. And in line with the theme, build and strengthen strategic partnerships to address various issues related to water and sanitation through the One Health approach and within the Caribbean Cooperation in Health Framework 4. Our aim is to support Caribbean countries in increasing capacity to adapt to and reduce the effects of climate change on public health. Allow me to highlight the work being done by some of our key partners in this area. The Caribbean Public Health Agency, CARFA, is developing climate resilient water and sanitation safety plans and protocols, while the Caribbean community, the CARICOM Secretariat, is facilitating training for the Caribbean youth ambassadors in climate change and health, while seeking to raise the profile of climate change and health, of the climate change and health agenda at various levels and forums, of which groundwater is a critical component. And the University of the West Indies St. Augustine campus is currently preparing for the second cohort for the Fellows Leadership Program, which is set up to train early mid-career professionals from across the Caribbean to be leaders in the field of climate change and health. The aim is that they will leave the fellowship with the knowledge and skills to support the climate change and health agenda in their home countries and across the region. The interest and enthusiasm shown by our young people in preparing for these events has not gone without notice, as we have recognized that young people are a fundamental part of the conceptualization, design, and implementing solutions around the climate change and health. We intend to do even more with this target group of young people generally during this year and in 2023. Even as we come together to discuss these linkages, it would be remiss of me not to take a moment to pay tribute to Dr. Hugh Seeley, who passed away suddenly last weekend. Dr. Silly served as an advisor to the project's Climate and Health Advisory Group, which is an aspect of the EU CARIFORUM Climate Change and Health Project. He worked on the Barbados Groundwater Quality Monitoring Project collaboratively with PAHO and other partners. The outputs have been recognized as essential baselines for the recently amended groundwater protection policies. Though we have never met in person, our team and retired water, sanitation, and hygiene expert, Adrianus Blugman, popularly known as Ton Blugman, he noted in one of his presentations over the weekend, or comments rather, in reference to Dr. Silly's passing, Dr. Silly's knowledge, positive energy, and people skills are worthy of emulation, and his ability to understand the wider picture. Additionally, his humility and jovial nature put everyone at ease. Dr. Silly served PAHO in several advisory capacities, including the review of environmental health services in the Bahamas and Guyana, as well as in the formulation of PAHO's climate change and health policies, most recently in the development of the Climate Action Plan on Climate Change and Health 2018-2019. Our thoughts and prayers go out to his family and friends. As I close, I cannot emphasize enough the importance of moving beyond building strong partnerships, but also managing those partnerships well and sustaining them around the broader climate change and health issues, and more specifically around the groundwater issues. As PAHO is celebrating its 120th anniversary, the organization is strategically positioned and is committed to supporting efforts to strengthen regional integration in health-related matters, and as it relates to the objectives of this project in climate change and health. I would also like to challenge our young people to continue to find creative and innovative ways to participate in the analysis, examination, design, and implementation of programs, projects, and initiatives aimed at reducing the issues around groundwater. Thank you, and I wish you all good success with the other aspects of this event and World Water Day observances. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Ms. Thomas, and thank you for your tribute to Dr. Seeley. I think you definitely highlighted the importance of building and sustaining partnerships, and I think this links to intergenerational dialogues like what we're having here today. So I think we would jump right now into the panel discussion. First, I'd just like to introduce our panelists today. First, in our live session today, we have Mr. Janil Diallari. Please forgive me if I pronounced your name wrong, but multi-country WASH and emergency preparedness consult for the Caribbean, UNICEF Regional Office for the Latin America and the Caribbean, as well as Esther Maslow, Indigenous Youth Representative from Guyana, and the effect of climate change on water resources in Indigenous farms in Guyana, as well as Adrian Cashman, Water Management Consultant, and Wayne Williams, the Executive Director of the Caribbean Water and Wastewater Association, as well as the panelist whose videos were recorded, Dr. Kim Newton-James, the UE Fellow and Environmental Toxicologist and Technical Officer, Chemical and Solid Waste Management for the Caribbean Public Health Agency, CARPHA, as well as Ton Vlugman and from PAHO. So thank you very much, and we can get started into the live session today. So I believe first up is Adrian Cashman. First, can you tell us a little bit about yourself and what you do?
Yeah, sure, and thank you very much for the invitation to be with everybody on this occasion of World Water Day. A little bit about myself. I come from a family of engineers, but I'm also an environmental economist, and I've always worked in water. In fact, my first job was working in a stormwater sewer. Sorry, I should have said working on a stormwater sewer. I've been a civil servant. I worked in Namibia for nearly 20 years, working in the Ministry of Water Affairs there. Now that is a truly water scarce country. The other thing is that I've worked at the University of the West Indies, the Center for Resource Management and Environmental Studies, where I was the director for 4 years there. And something that people really won't guess about me, not in their wildest dreams, but I actually grew up until I was 8 years old in Jamaica. And I know I don't sound like it. We went there, my dad worked on the Norman Manley Airport as it was then. And one of my earliest memories is actually being out on Mona Reservoir. So that's a little bit about me.
Thank you very much, and thank you for your introduction. So I'd just like to know, what does your work as a water management consultant in the Caribbean involve?
Well, I work across the Caribbean. I've worked in Guyana, I've worked obviously in Barbados, where I'm based, right the way up to Belize and in the Bahamas. So in the 13 odd years that I've been in the Caribbean, I've got to know quite a lot of people. There's some of them are actually on the panel at the moment. I work mostly in policy and planning, working with funding agencies, working with governments, working with water authorities, trying to answer questions, looking at questions like, what do we need to do in the water sector to adapt to climate change? What are some of the sensible options that we can implement? How do we ensure that everybody has equitable access to water? What about sanitation? Should we be reusing wastewater? How do we come up with arguments? How do we motivate these things and attract the funding that we need to implement solutions, not just hard solutions, but soft solutions as well, getting everybody involved. And I suppose the big question is, how can we learn and do things better? So that's a little bit about what I do. I'm not going to go into all the projects. I'll bore the pants off you if I do that.
Great, thank you so much for sharing. And just following from what you said, what actions do you think people, and especially young people and children in the Caribbean and organizations, can take to protect groundwater to increase management?
That's a really big question. So let's try and narrow it down to things that we can all understand and hopefully can actually do something about. So the first thing is that, I know it hasn't been said already this evening, which is a little bit surprising, is that water is a precious and a scarce resource. So not wasting it protects it. And we can all do things, little things in our own way to protect that water resource. For example, I have a bucket in my shower. So when I'm not using that water, I'm actually collecting it, and I can use it on my garden. I can use it to wash the car and, for other purposes around the house. So that's a really, really simple thing that everybody can do. The second thing I'd like to bring to people's attention is something called fog. And I'm not talking about what goes on in the atmosphere. I'm talking about fats, oils, and greases and the way we manage that. The way we handle fog, fats, oils, and greases does actually have a big impact on the way we dispose of our water, because how often do we just flush things down the sink there? If we flush hot oil down our sink into our wastewater systems, it clogs it up. That means we're going to actually have to call the plumbers out, get it declogged. If it goes into wastewater collection systems, it causes fatbergs there, which means that the wastewater systems can't function properly. So here it is. If you're going to use oils, use vegetable-based oils. Once you've used it, let it cool. Because it's vegetable-based, it will biodegrade. So you can use that in your compost. Composting, really great way to also help the environment. So I would just like to share just those two little things about things that each of us can understand and can do something about.
Absolutely. Thank you so much for sharing. And I definitely understand your points and think that it's also something that needs to be implemented in our educational systems. I'm currently in high school in 10th grade, and I think things like this, green skills and what we can do to take simple actions in our households, in our school communities is exactly what we need. So thank you.
Absolutely. Yes.
I'd now just like to move on to Mr. Janil Diallari. So can you please just tell us a little bit about yourself and a short introduction?
Hi, Priyanka. Hi, everyone. Thank you for having me. And about myself, so I'm currently working for UNICEF Regional Office for Latin America and the Caribbean, covering the Caribbean. I've been, like Adrian, always working in WASH, water, sanitation, and hygiene, especially in emergency response with NGOs, international NGOs, United Nations, WHO, UNICEF, IOM, and mostly in Africa, actually, for about 13 years in West Africa and Central Africa. Almost every country in Africa, I think, I've done with different emergencies. Bit in Asia, in Bangladesh and Papua New Guinea, and now I'm on this continent. So I'm happy to be with you and provide any advice. Thank you.
Thank you very much. And can you tell me a little bit about what your work as a regional WASH and emergencies preparedness consultant in the Caribbean involves?
Yeah, sure. So I've started about 6 months ago now. I'm currently based in Ecuador, but I'll be soon in Jamaica, and I'm covering all the English-speaking Caribbean territories and countries. So basically, as I said, WASH is water, sanitation, and hygiene. And my role is to support the WASH actors in the Caribbean to be better equipped to respond to future disasters, such as earthquakes, storms, floodings, and hurricanes in particular. So it's about establishing key partnerships with the governments, water utilities, water operators, national and regional disaster management agencies, NGOs, and civil society organizations, the private sector too, which is big in the Caribbean, the youth, of course, and UN agencies. So UNICEF has a very good collaboration with PAHO, co-leading the regional WASH Latin America and Caribbean group, which is a regional body coordinating the efforts on the WASH sector and actors. And currently my work is to set up national WASH coordination platforms in each of these countries and territories, supporting the National Emergency Management Organization or the Ministry of Health mostly, to lead and mobilize all the WASH stakeholders. And the idea is to equip them with tools and processes to help them to be better ready to disasters, as I said. So it's like contingency planning, WASH preparedness and response plan to hurricanes or earthquakes or floods. We are working together on climate resilience water safety plan within this EU CARIFORUM project with Rihanna. And we are also doing some innovation, working on a floating desalination plant, which has zero footprint with solar panels, which is autonomous, and that would be stationed in the Caribbean and be available to be deployed at any given time should a disaster occur. So that's in a nutshell my work. Thank you.
Great, thank you very much for sharing. And I definitely am really admiring the work that you've done here in the Caribbean and obviously in other parts of the world as well. And I think that definitely a point was highlighted is the accessibility. I think in the small island developing states, we need more resources and infrastructure and access to renewable resources and things that can help us achieve the sustainable development goals. So I think that this is definitely a step in the right direction. So thank you very much for sharing. And I think now I'll just jump to Wayne Williams. Mr. Williams, can you just give an introduction?
Priyanka, Wayne Williams. I am currently the Executive Director of the Caribbean Water and Wastewater Association, CWWA, as we're known by. It's an association that's celebrated its 30th year, actually this year, 2021, being incorporated by an Act of Parliament in Trinidad in 1991. I'm also a past president. I served in the years 2010 to 2012, if I remember correctly. But of course, always been around. I was there at the start because a lot of people know my father, who actually formed the CWWA in 1991. And a bit of that history is that he worked for WHO before they know him as Paho. In fact, he was Ton's boss when Ton was an extremely young man. And we lived in Africa for the first few years of my life, Iraq, Egypt, and Ethiopia, water scarce countries. I learned to appreciate a lot about that life over there and how much we have over here. And so, I went to University of Florida, which I'm very proud of, environmental engineer, and just came back home immediately. I didn't even want to walk the graduation. I just wanted to leave and come back home, and I got a job with the Water Authority right away. It was excellent timing. And since then, I've worked in wastewater primarily. I'm a specialist in that. I love wastewater. I compare it to water treatment, as in water treatment, you just try to kill everything so that it's safe. In wastewater treatment, it's like a big fish tank that you have to keep alive and let those microorganisms work for you. And when you give them everything, here, Adrian is laughing, and you give them everything they need, then they give you what you want, and which is good, which is pretty clear water on the back end. And that water now is being looked at to being used elsewhere because it is useful. There is no such thing as wastewater anymore. Somebody is going to change that name because, yeah, so that's where we are today.
Great, thanks so much for sharing. And I'd just like to know a little bit about CWWA's role in the region with respect to the development of the water sector today and how the organization is helping move forward to more sustainable opportunities and more sustainable solutions.
Okay, great. Well, I could start off by saying that we help making the invisible visible in that a lot of times water, wastewater, and we're also known as in the solid waste sector. You don't miss it until it's gone, and you don't see waste, you don't see water professionals unless they may be fixing the road and digging it up, and then that people are upset about that. But it's basically all part of the work. But our main role with respect to development of the water sector is advocacy. We bring people together at all levels, from youth to government ministers. And so, we support and provide the resources for continuous learning and training. In fact, if I may make a shameless plug, today we are launching our Research Education Foundation with the catchy acronym REEF, that we're going to be providing training in the region alongside many of the other folks that are doing training. We will fill the gaps, and so we're launching that today, so you'll see more about that. Otherwise, we also bring in people together to look at sound scientific and technical knowledge in the different categories, because there's a lot of going on in the industry, and there's a lot of progress, there are a lot of developments. And so we have a specialist group that we have on our first one on water loss. As you can imagine, once you live anywhere once you live anywhere, because apparently Europe has that problem as well, there are leaking pipes, and there's water that's getting away and not getting to where it needs to go, and it's a big deal. So won't get into that. We could talk for hours on that alone. But it's also changed public perception about water, and also wastewater. Wastewater is a valuable resource. Water is a product that can be treated to any level that you want it to, just like oil. You can take it and you can clean it. You can take water from a river, which we do, and treat it to the point where it's drinking water. A lot of people talk about reuse and how, the first response is ew. But I tell you that once you've drunk water from a treatment plant on a river, you have already drunk reuse water because of everything that goes into the river. So it's not a problem to treat it to whatever you want. We are known for our high-level forum. We bring government ministers together within the water and with the portfolio of water and wastewater, and also solid waste. We're the only group that does that. It's an annual thing. We have our annual conference and exhibition. This is in October. Another shameless plug. It's going to be in Bahamas this year, in the month of October. So we bring together everybody to discuss and to move the sector forward, technically, politically, legislation-wise, in all the different aspects for water sector development.
Great, thank you so much for sharing. And I definitely like your acronym, REEF. And I think that things like this, simple things like this, as I mentioned before, should be implemented in our education systems locally, in our school curriculums, and simple things like this to teach young people and children about what problems are affecting us here in the Caribbean and worldwide, as well as, more importantly, how we can act, how we can mitigate and adapt. And I think that this is also definitely a step in the right direction and helping integrate our solutions and what our professionals like you all are saying with what our young people need to know.
Yep,
so
definitely.
I think, yes, I think now I'll just jump to Esther Moslow. Miss Moslow, would you mind just doing a short introduction?
Sure, no problem. Hi, everyone. I'm Esther Marslow, Indigenous youth from Guyana. Specifically, I'm a Lokono, and I'm very humbled and grateful to be among this esteemed panelists. And I just want to say that, like, one of my passion is the environment, and I feel like my culture has influenced my academic decision, and that's why, like, I choose to pursue a degree in environmental studies, and is a big part for me. So I'm really, really passionate about the environment and all that is involved with it. Yes.
Great, thank you so much for sharing. And I'd also just like to know about what has been the impact of climate change and how it's impacted the water supply and the quality of water in the hinterlands.
Okay, so first off, I should say that water is something that we Indigenous people find very sacred. We appreciate it a lot, like the other elements, earth, nature, and so forth. And it is because of this, is a major part of our belief system, especially for our livelihood and certain ceremonies that are performed for our culture. But what has happened over the years is that my ancestors would have developed a system where they used bioindicators to create a meteorological system where they would have been able to make predictions about the different seasons, and they would have been aware of when the dry season would start, when the rainy season would start, and this would help them plan their lives accordingly. And just for one instance, like a local thing that we do is that if you hear a toucan making noise, singing, we'd say that, oh, it's about to rain. Or if we see the wild sunflower blossoming, we know that the rainy season is approaching, so that we know, it's time for spawning, fish spawning. It's time where we can plant. It's time where the waters would be replenished. And what has happened as the climate changed, these systems have been interrupted, and therefore the meteorological system we once used isn't as accurate as before. So we don't know anymore how to predict these things. And one thing that I was recalling today is that I come from a riverine community, and at certain times we know when the sun is somewhere at a particular point in the sky, we say, oh, it's going to be low tide or it's going to be high tide. And with that, we know when to harvest fresh water from the river and when not to. But because of the climate change, it's not that anymore. And it has really impacted how we utilize water now. Like for some instances, in some communities, you would have to, when it's low tide, you utilize the water from the river, because that's when the water comes from the source and it's flowing out to the main river and then empties into the ocean. However, when it's high tide, that means the water is coming back from the sea into the main rivers and back to the tributaries. So it would not be logical to use it. And now what we find is that, like before, sorry, we would have known, like, okay, so when it's high tide, the water would meet up to a certain point where it's salted and it can be diluted, and you know that you have to go beyond that point. But now it's moving further inland, and that is a problem, because as saltwater intrudes further inland, then the sources are being put at risk, and not only the sources but aquatic organisms, fishes, and that has a very, very extensive impact, because humans rely on fish for a livelihood. Even some land animals rely on these aquatic organisms. So it has had, an extensive impact for our people, especially in the hinterland. And also, another thing to consider too is that we've noticed the change in dry season patterns and rainy season. So that would have obviously affected the flooding and the droughts that we would have experienced. So one of the things that persons would have done is, during the dry season, you know that you have to prepare yourself for water shortage. So persons would dig ponds to tap into the groundwater system. But now with extensive drought periods, some of those ponds, they don't produce as much water as they used to. The water level decreases. Some ponds even dry up. And this puts them at risk at being not able to access fresh water. On the other hand, during the flooding season, during floods, that has a whole nother impact where sometimes it contaminates water sources, especially for communities in close proximity to mining areas. One of the things is, in Guyana, we still utilize mercury for mining. So imagine a mining pit being flooded, right? That chemical is being transported into our waterways. And if persons utilize it, they can be exposed to mercury contamination. Another impact too that flooding would have had, would have been, scaring away of the snakes and other harmful reptiles and amphibians. And those things, like in 2020, I think that we had one of the worst floods, and places that were not flood prone were flooded. And I'm talking about places that are high in elevation, and you find that very surprising. So climate change has severely impacted hinterland communities, and it continues to do so.
Thank you so much for sharing. And I definitely acknowledge your points on how it affects communities and specific communities in Guyana as well, and specifically with the flooding and things that are effects of climate change, such as droughts. So definitely in relation to this, I was wondering, do you think that people understand how their actions impact water quality and access in regards to identifying the problem and identifying how people and themselves are affecting it?
I feel to an extent, yes, persons are aware, but the consequences right now aren't as drastic to them. They aren't faced firsthand with the impact. So it's like, okay, I can continue to let them pollute the air, the riverway. It's not affecting me. It might not affecting me in my immediate environment, but it might be affecting someone down river, right? So I think it has a lot to do. We have to start educating persons and putting systems in place to make people act. Um, it's only when you as an individual face that impact from your actions, then you start taking things seriously. But what about the person who is affected by your action? Yes.
Yeah, absolutely. I think you definitely highlighted the linkages between the effects and how climate change is affecting us, as well as how we understand how our actions are impacting our environments and our communities. So I think definitely overall it was highlighted about the opportunities and the infrastructure that's being implemented, as well as the impact that this is having on our local water supplies, on our regional water supplies, and the quality and quantity of water. And I think that it's so important to identify the intergenerational dialogue that's taking here today. And all of you are professionals in your field. And I think that is so important that we recognize that we have the information, we have the data, the factual information, and even the solutions, but it's really about implementing it into our daily life and taking action. And as Mr. Cashman mentioned, how can we take small steps to create great impact? So I was wondering, I'm just opening it up to the floor. How do you think these solutions and what is being said here today can be put into real action and can impact young people? How can our young people learn from what is being said here today in our education systems, in our school curriculums, capacity building opportunities? What do you think the solution for this is? And I'm just opening it up to the floor.
Right, well, maybe I, as a former educator, maybe I can sort of jump in there a little bit. First of all, I think there are actually quite a lot of opportunities to learn. I think these days, if there's one thing that's come out of the COVID pandemic, it's been an absolute mushrooming of opportunities to learn more about water without actually having to spend, enroll in undergraduate programs or master's programs or anything like that. There are those opportunities where we can go in. However, they're not that well known. I think the other thing is that one of the things is about using scarce resources. And I think one of the scarce resources that we have is a scarcity of opportunities for young people to get involved in water and get involved with not only with water at a sort of NGO level, but get involved in the water sector itself. And I think we really need to impress on some of the people running our water sector, whether in the water utilities or government, that we need to listen to young people. We need to create opportunities for that, to bring them in. Now, some of those opportunities are talking about what we do, sharing the experience. And I'm really glad to hear that my good friends at CWWA have embarked on this initiative. And that's exactly the sort of thing that we need to, but we need to spread the word. And hopefully events like this can help us do that.
Absolutely. Thank you very much. And I think just adding on to what you said, it's so important to bring awareness to these things. And especially, I know that in Trinidad and Tobago, when it rains, it floods, and almost annually, people's homes are destroyed, their belongings are lost. And I think definitely in informal communities, children and young people at the grassroots levels, they are seeing and feeling the effects of climate change on a daily basis, but it's not identified as climate change. It's recognized as something that just happens on an annual basis. And I think that this is similar to what Esther Maslow was saying about how this is affecting Indigenous people and communities in Guyana as well. So I think that definitely education and bringing awareness to events like this and what our professionals have to say is crucial, but also making sure that we close the gap and ensure that the people who are being directly affected know what to do and they are educated about it. And I think that this should be done through capacity building, community outreach programs, and even things like this being made more accessible to the public.
Yeah,
so
we really do need to create opportunities, because if we don't create opportunities for young people, they will leave, not they, you, Esther, will leave the region. We cannot afford to lose the talent that we have. So we need to create opportunities that people can, young people, people with energy, with ideas, can share that and build on that. Because if we don't, the resource that we have, we're going to lose you.
Absolutely. Thank you very much for sharing. And I also just had another question specifically for Mr. Diallari. I just wanted to know, how can we better prepared to mitigate the effects of climate change on WASH?
Thank you for the question, Priyanka. I'm enjoying this conference. It's really nice. As UNICEF, we have found out that 17.8 million of children are living in areas of high or extremely high water vulnerability. So every generation is concerned. First, we can be better prepared by understanding the risk, which includes incorporating disaster risk reduction and climate change adaptation into all layers of society. And this starts with the incorporation of DRR and climate change adaptation into the formal education curriculum. It's happening in some countries more and more, but not every country, especially in the Caribbean. But it's also about partnering with the media. The media are the public opinion influencers, and collaborating with you guys, the youth advocates, is a great step, I believe. So once we have understood the risk, we need to assess it in order to identify the key investments that are needed, especially for groundwater resources protection. But for that, we need data. And I found out, being 6 months only now in the region, that this is the biggest challenge in the Caribbean, the lack of data. We need to document and measure the impact of climate change and ground our actions on evidence-based decision-making. So conducting baseline, risk assessment, studies, vulnerability mappings, all those the kind of things that can help us to be better prepared to mitigate the effects of climate change. As we do for the Sendai framework, which helps countries and governments to monitor their action in terms of disaster risk reduction, we need to do the same for climate change adaptation in order to be able to measure the impact of our action and thus better advocate towards the donors and the decision makers. As an example, the Joint Monitoring Program data, which is a collaboration between WHO and UNICEF, I see that there's a lot of data that are missing for the Caribbean. And we need to invest in the information management in the Caribbean, as the island nations are increasingly exposed to natural disasters, which affect actually the groundwater resources in both intensity, magnitude, and frequency. Then by putting people together, partnership is key to be better prepared to mitigate the effects of climate change, especially on water and sanitation and hygiene resources. We can involve the academia, amplify the voice of the youth. That's why we have our UNICEF ambassadors, actually, and I think they are online with us. And as a global sector lead for water, sanitation, and hygiene, UNICEF wants to act as a convener and facilitator to connect the dots through coordination forums, where key actions can be defined together to address the challenges encountered by the island nations, and impactful actions such as groundwater recharge, climate smart schools with rainwater harvesting, circular sanitation, reusing the gray waters in schools affected by hurricanes, solarization with solar panel like we do in the Bahamas, Jamaica, and Belize are already taking place. Thank you.
Great, thank you so much for sharing, and thank you for bringing light towards what is happening and what WASH is doing in regards to this and what can be implementing, and even what you're doing in regards to work with young people and education, and as you even mentioned, working with youth advocates and young people who are directly affected as well. So thank you very much. And I believe that there is another question for Mr. Cashman. So Mr. Cashman, what would you say are some of the strategies that need to be utilized in order to manage our water?
Right, now that's quite a big question. I hope you've got the next 4 hours while I answer that one. No, seriously. I think for me, we need to look beyond the short term. One of the things that we really have a scarcity of across the Caribbean, and I'm not discounting the deficit of data. We've known about that for the last 20 odd years. But data is one thing, but you've got to use the data. And the deficit that we have, that I see, is a lack of long-term planning. We're really good at looking at short-term solutions. We see something's flooding, so we put up a wall. That's not a solution. Ask yourself the question, why is it flooding there? Long-term planning, we need to look at a 30-year time horizon. Why do I say 30-year? Maybe even 50-year, because the decisions that we make today are going to be with us for that length of time. Hard infrastructure lasts 30, 40, 50 years. Barbados and some other countries are still using water systems that were put in 150 years ago. So we need to have that long-term perspective and look creatively at some of the solutions that are there. I mean, one of my big bugbears, and I'm going to go out a bit on a limb here, is one of my big bugbears is that we look at desalination as a solution to all our water woes. Well, it's not. It's a part of the solution, but it is not the solution that seems to be taken up. It needs to be part of a strategy. And one of those strategies is, and Wayne has referred to it, we need to look at, he doesn't like the term wastewater, and I agree with him there. I mean, would you buy a waste car from somebody? No, you wouldn't. You'd buy a pre-owned car. So we should be looking at pre-owned water and seeing how we can reconfigure that it becomes part of something, using a big term, the circular economy. In other words, we don't use it and throw it away. We learn how to reuse that to maximize our use of resources. So I think those are just, I'll get off my soapbox in a minute, but we need long-term vision. We need to back it up with data. And I think there are opportunities for data collection beyond the professionals, right? We all use smartphones. They can take pictures that are geolocated. One of the problems when you do flood prediction, flood modeling, is that you're not quite sure how far that water's come up. We can use photographs, crowdsourcing. There are huge opportunities out there to improve and expand the data that we have and make it, but it's all got to be for a purpose. And we need that long-term vision. And I don't think that, certainly in my opinion, long-term planning is something that we do not do very well. I'll leave it to Wayne. He can comment on some of the initiatives that he knows and I know that are out there that are trying to address that. As I say, I'm going to get off my soapbox for a minute and let somebody else have a go.
Great, thank you so much. And thank you also for bringing highlighting the importance for concrete long-term solutions and bringing awareness to circular economy. And I immediately thought of one of my solutions, zero waste living, which I try to implement in my school as well. So I think that's definitely a crucial point. And there is a question open to all panelists. It is, do you think that people understand how their own actions impact water quality and access in regards to the chemicals, waste, pesticides, and unpaid bills? And this is just an open question.
I can start off there, Priyanka, with that one. Not necessarily. Most people don't really understand the ramifications of their actions. You know, I still see people going, when I'm driving behind someone on the highway, throw out a food box that ends up in a river. Because in Trinidad, there's a certain section where you can see the river, a couple of the big drains before they go to the sea, and they're just floating plastics like crazy. And the people who threw them didn't throw them there, they threw them upstream somewhere. The folks who are using fertilizer and pesticides, you know, it's like a joke. They said, well, if 1 gram works really good, 2 grams works better. And so you over pesticide and you overdo it. When it rains and the runoff now, of course, it is exacerbated by the climate change ramifications, in that we talked about flooding. So there's water, and Esther very nicely said that the situation in Guyana last year was crazy. Water is going where it wasn't before, and it's taking with it all kind of different evils that now the water company may not have had to treat in the first place, and the treatment plant may not have been designed for that level of contamination. There are things like there are areas where in floods the residents open the sewer manholes so that the water can drain off and go away, because you know it's coming in their house. So what are they going to do? They look around and like, hey, you know, if you open that cover, the water will go away. Well, the water goes away, but it also pulls in everything that was sitting on the ground with it. And so not only did the treatment plant, the wastewater treatment plant, have to deal with water it was not designed to treat in terms of volume, it also has a lot more undesirables, I put that, in the water that they have to remove, that they previously, as I said, weren't designed to. So a lot, as I'm saying in my first statement, was on making the invisible visible. You know, people flush and they don't know where it goes. People throw things in drains and rivers and they don't know where it goes. Once it leaves where I am, then I'm okay. And the ramification we have, just me locally here above on the hill, we have farmers. They're cutting down bamboo and they're planting green onions. I mean, look at the difference. Look at the difference in the absorption capacity of rainwater coming down the hill between bamboo, which of course is extremely thirsty, and some 1 foot tall green onion plants. Yes, we do need them, but I mean, it causes floods down in our neighborhood, 2 feet high, 3 feet high, just off of that. So, one could argue that the government planning agencies perhaps don't do enough, but common sense will tell you certain other things that really you shouldn't do. And of course, littering and some of those basic things, you would think with all the discussion we have these days that people would not do it, but it's still happening. So thanks, over.
Absolutely. Thank you very much. And I definitely understand the point you highlighted in regards to the individual action people take and how that is not connected to the bigger picture and how it ultimately affects our environments, our ecosystems, and how they are later on affected as well, and the differences between what our governments have to do and individual action as well. So thank you very much, and thank you to all our panelists today. I think this intergenerational dialogue and this session definitely highlighted the linkages between water, climate, and our health around the region and around the world on World Water Day. So thank you very much for joining, and thank you for commemorating World Water Day today. I think there's definitely a lot to learn from our session, and thank you to our panelists.
Thank you, Priyanka. Good job.
Good job indeed. Well done.
Yes, thank you for having me.
Thanks, Priyanka. Yep. Thanks everybody else for a great session there.
Yeah, it's good. Very
Great.
good.